this episode, we will hear how directors are managing the increasing pressure to consider climate-related legal risks to build awareness and resilience for their organisations.
Risk of litigation on top of the board members' agenda with regard to climate change or climate transition. We all know that every once in a while we have currently some also very prominent cases. You might remember the one from, I think it was in Switzerland specifically, where a couple of people fought for a better recognition, so to say, of the whole topic in front of the court. And I think, yes, those incidents specifically, or sometimes, often regularly, you get some letters, or you get approached by an NGO, for example, who is keen to get certain information or asks for some background information. I think as a board member anyhow, you need to just be aware of that. That is part of doing business. And of course, outside stakeholders have the right, and it's their role partially to ask those questions and to poke into certain topics. I think it's important really to, as a board member, I would always like to be more on the front foot than on the back foot. So I think it's always important to go back in those moments where you invest to make sure you embed that in your decision. Is this investment wise and sensible and also economically valid when I take into consideration that, I don't know, in that area where I invest, temperature might change, some aspects of too much or too little water might change, or some other things that are climate related. And I think you need to have that in that moment in consideration, and be a bit more on the front foot than on the back foot.
Well, let me say, with respect to where risk should be monitored from the board's standpoint, it certainly needs to be part of the ERM system, because the ERM system is the system that is already embedded in many companies, and if it's not, it should be. So to not have risk as part of the ERM is totally wrong, but it should not stop there. No, it should be part of the overall strategy opportunity discussion. And that, I think, is where companies are falling short. Risks that are part of the ERM system and are on the risk template range all the way from having a sole source supplier to the risk of not being able to get the right people.
The investors want a return, and they want a good return. Sometimes the meetings, they bring their sustainability people, and then it changes a little bit. But generally speaking, it's important to understand the different perspectives of the different stakeholders. So one of the things we've done, and that I've seen work very well, is, it really does make sense when you do those materiality assessments to do broad-based stakeholder feedback and do multiple types of feedback, because it's all over the map in terms of what people are looking for from organizations on this topic. Yes, I want to talk about a key stakeholder, which is governments. And governments have different points of view depending on who's in power, and of course jurisdictions. So the policies around greenhouse gas emissions in the US, Europe, Canada, wide spectrum. But what's even more difficult is not so much the differences, it's whether or not, those policies will be in place for the long term.
I've never, in all these years of being in boards, I have never had such an uncertain environment to be planning into, particularly in policy terms. So boards have to think very hard about all their stakeholders in this agenda. And I think that the idea of greenwashing is very unfortunate, because it's if you believe that companies need to be ambitious, then if they miss their targets and then they're accused of overstating, that is unfortunate. It doesn't help. But on the other hand, we absolutely can't have companies sort of capitalizing on things that they're not, when they're not actually really taking the action. But I think the broader stakeholder group is important. And I mean, to me, one of the most important stakeholder groups now is the employees. I mean, the war for talent hasn't gone away.
We see at this moment that there are 3,000 court cases started by NGOs against companies and 80 court cases against countries. And that is because the NGOs, rightly so, have the opinion that we are moving too slow. And let's be honest, since the Paris Agreement signed by 200 countries, that's almost everybody in the world, we have never ever been on track with our own goals. So, correctly so, people want to speed up companies from a legal perspective as well. I only warn that this can have an adverse effect as well. And that is that companies who are sued have lesser intention to disclose their targets, to disclose where they are heading at, to sign all kind of petitions and big documents globally and commitments because they feel they can be sued. And then they move in the opposite direction. And that would be an adverse effect of the right action to push companies to do more.
I think it's a challenging question for many boards to navigate, because I think many feel that they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, in terms of responding to this increased need for transparency that also, of course, implies a certain level of risk. And that risk is in many ways related to data quality. So certainly I think we have a responsibility here to make sure that these efforts don't stifle progress, but rather that it leads to more sort of stringent and convinced leadership. And this is a delicate balance to strike. I certainly think that boards that are more aware of where their risks lies probably will also come out with a more higher quality if it's transition plans or if it's disclosures.